This is true, and you can test me on it. A good story is better than a well-crafted lie. Let me say that again. A good story is better than a well-crafted lie. And I think I've got some strong evidence to prove it. That's what we're going to talk about in this episode of Leading Leaders. Stay tuned.
Think storytelling's just for bedtime? Nah, it's the secret sauce for business magic. Stuck in a rut with bland pitches and yawning clients? Enter Boost Your Business with Story Power. 6 weeks of epic storytelling training. It's like leveling up in a video game but for your career. Master the art of narrative and watch connections blossom like a viral TikTok. Simple, impactful, and game-changing. Ready to transform your biz vibes? Dive in now and make storytelling your superpower.
Subscribe now for access to our extensive media library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom. Begin your personal growth plan at storypoweracademy.com for leadership development and communication skills training. Subscribe now for...
I'm Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast, and it's a true story. A good story is better than a well-crafted lie. In fact, the good story, well told, is much better than a good crafted lie. I see people all the time, they use the AI to craft the story. It's a bit of a fake story. It's a completely made up story. In fact, it just happens to pull in a little bit of information from various places to craft a story that's really nothing more than a very well crafted lie. But it never happened. None of the people who were part of the story were actually there because the story didn't actually happen. The event may have even been completely made up. Now, we've been watching over the last 10 or so years the idea of fake news. And it's one thing to think that what happened was told through a slant or an angle, or the story was a little bit tilted in the way of favoring one party versus another one, idea versus another one, outcome versus another. It's called a narrative. A narrative out of control can become propaganda. But there are reasons to use alliteration and emotion. There are reasons to use well-crafted, very poignant, very persuasive phraseology. In fact, in communication, good conversations kind of incorporate all those things, and they should. Yet there are those stories that when you're done hearing them, you kind of feel smarmy. Maybe you've seen them recently on social media. I mean, everybody says, tell stories, man, you got to tell stories. And I watch people step to the front of the room and they're like, I am a phenomenal storyteller. Or someone else will say, well, they're a phenomenal storyteller. And they get to the front of the room and they say a lot of words and they use all of those tips and tricks and techniques. And it's a very tantalizing demonstration of wordsmithing. Tempting to follow what they're offering, but it's not a story. I mean, it's a bunch of words strung together, but it's not a story. It's not an event. It's not an incident. It's not something that actually happened. It's just well-crafted words. And well-crafted words, even when they make up a somewhat interesting story, well, that's not a story. A story is an event. It's an incident. And when you go through the story power training, what you find is that it's not just an incident attached to a point. I've worked with coaches who say, tell a story, make a point. Tell a story, make a point. Don't tell a story that you don't make a point. Don't make a point that you didn't tell a story. Whether the story comes before or after the point doesn't matter as long as you tell a story, make a point. I've heard words almost identical to that from various coaches that I've worked alongside and coaches that I've worked with. And yet, even that isn't actually a story power story. What we teach in story power is that when you have a story that's well crafted of an incident that you lived through, the chances are very high that you don't have to poke somebody in the nose and go, do you get my point? No, it just shows up. The lesson that you're trying to give them, the instructions that you want them to follow, the action that you want them to take. It's all in the story because you lived through that moment. You learned that lesson. You pulled that metaphor into reality in your own life and went, aha. And suddenly your aha moment, which may have come from a tragedy, your aha moment, which may have come from pure silliness, your aha moment, well, it becomes somebody else's lesson without you having to force feed it to them, without you having to stomp on their toes, smack them in the head, or make them feel less than. See, the ability to provide that convergence of your experience with their desire for future knowledge, your past with their future, it rests in a story. Now, some of them are very obvious. The story that you tell that it just says, I did this, I got this result. If you'll do this, you'll get this result. Those are pretty simple. It's the old feel, felt, found method of sales. A lot of people feel like, I once felt like, but I found that if I do this, I get a different result. All of these sales techniques, the sales persuasion models, they all make sense. The juxtaposition of story is a powerful, powerful thing. And a lot of people, because they know this to be true, Russell Brunson, hook, story, offer. Doesn't matter how good your offer is, if your story doesn't push people toward the offer, if your story doesn't reveal the hope of the offer, if your story doesn't cause them to feel a need to take advantage of this offer, then nobody buys the offer. But if your hook is no good, nobody listens to the story. So you have to have a great hook before you tell a story, before you give the offer. In fact, Russell says it this way: if your hook's not good enough, you don't get permission to tell the story. And if you do, nobody's really listening. They've already tuned out because your hook was weak. But if you got a great hook and you got a great story, then your offer will succeed if you have the right offer. Of course, it's got to be an irresistible offer. It's got to be you'd have to be silly not to take this offer kind of an offer. But you got to have a good hook. You got to have a good story that leads to a good offer. Tony Robbins says a very similar thing. He says you got to have the right state before you tell a good story to have the right offer, or to have the right strategies. But most people start with the strategies, have a corrupt story, and can't figure out why nothing changes. Well, if your state and your story are in conflict, your story doesn't even work inside your own head. Now we go to another level of story. Because I'm not just talking about the sales persuasive story. Very true, very important, very effective. But the story that you're telling in the mirror, that one matters too. Later this week, we're going to talk about how billionaire isn't a bank statement. It's a mindset statement. It's what's going on inside your head. Billionaire eventually shows up in the bank because that's how we keep record. That's how we keep score of those who are succeeding and those who are not. But that doesn't start there. You don't become a billionaire when you have $1 billion in the bank. You become a billionaire because you fix the story in your head. You change the state, you change the story, you change the outcome. It's just the way it works. But if you don't change the state, the story doesn't matter. And if you only tell the story of what has been, not what will be, what you lived through, not where you're moving toward, what you've tolerated, not what you're creating, if that story is only past, you're not going anywhere except in a big circle. So you've got to craft a story that has substance and meaning, that looks at the aha moments of your life and also points to where you're going, where you've made a commitment to be. And you can craft a nice piece of literature, perhaps even grand fiction or fantasy. But the more in touch with the who that you are, that your story is, the more believable it'll be by you. And when it's believable by you, taking action on it is a whole lot easier. Now, I'm going to tell you something that dawned on me recently. We've been in our little hometown here where the studio is located in Granbury, Texas, for just over 3 years. February of 2023 or March of 2023 is when we moved here. And there's a couple of little networking events. One is hosted by the Chamber, one is hosted by the local Visitors Bureau that we attend as regularly as we can. And from the first day that we walked in to that little meeting, I've done nothing but tell stories. And when I mean nothing but tell stories, I mean it's not a whole lot of sales pitch. Usually 5 to 10 seconds at the end of my story when I say, I'm Loren Norris with Story Power Academy. We help leaders tell better stories better. That's it. That's the whole sales pitch. That's the entire elevator pitch, if you will. My name, the name of the company, and what we do. That's it. And yet we pulled literally thousands of dollars of business out of that room. How is that possible? Because stories convert. Simple as that. Stories convert. They convert audience members to listeners, listeners to customers, customers to fans, fans to friends. I have friends from that room because they heard me tell a story, came up afterward and went, I really relate to your story. My grandpa was a guy just like that. My granny used to make biscuits too. I have a dog just like your crazy little dog. And it's those stories that allow them to realize who I am. In fact, in the Story Power method, one of the things that we encourage people to do is what we call the 7 C's. I'm not going to give you all of them right here, but I can tell you if you join the 6 weeks program, it's actually in there. All 7 C's, you'll learn the whole thing. I can give you 4 of them though. Content, context, credibility, and credential. And when you incorporate those into a story that you're telling, you don't have to give a resume anymore. When you learn how to express your opinions and expose your core values, you don't have to walk around looking for people who dress like you, wear buttons like you, wear badges like you, wear hats like you. Because when you tell a story, a real story, a genuine story, and you intentionally craft that story from the very beginning to include the 7 C's, those things happen. And when you tell those stories genuinely and they're authentic, they're not made up for the purpose of convincing someone to come your way or persuading them to purchase from you. When you tell those real life stories, you draw people in. Now, you may also repel some people. That's just truth. Let me ask you this though. If you had a chance to do business with people who know, like, and trust you, and you know, like, and trust them, ever had to fire a client? That's hard stuff. It's hard to fire a client, but sometimes it's absolutely necessary to fire a client. If you use story power properly, tell good, true stories, tell them well, craft them well, include the 7 C's, express your opinions, expose your core values. When you do that, people hear your story, and your kind of people, your tribe, they move toward you. They want to be around someone who thinks and talks and acts like you. And those who are not your tribe self-identify and make haste somewhere else. Find somebody else. And you know as well as I do, there are thousands of people that do what you do. The way that you stand out in the crowd is by being genuine and authentic. It is the greatest USP in the world. I know who I am, and I don't have to pretend to be anybody else. I can be me all day. And if I can be me, and that attracts you to do business with me, we're going to have a great time. And eventually those who sat in the audience and heard me tell a story, and then moved from sitting in the audience hearing a story and saying, hey, I think I could do business with you. I'd like to learn what you teach. And then we have a long-term relationship with each other. Maybe it's a 6-week course. Maybe it's 90 days of coaching. Maybe it's a year-long program. Eventually, we move beyond just clients. Oh, I still serve them in that client capacity, but along the way somewhere we become friends. Why? Because I'm hearing all their stories and they're hearing all of mine. The good and the bad, the past and the future. Man, one day I'm going to flip the switch and my life is going to be like that. And I get behind them and I'm like, I believe that to be true. Let me help you find some strategies that will make it true faster. The faster we can make that happen, the better off the world will be, because you will be living at your capacity. And see, suddenly we've gone from strangers in the crowd who listened to a story, who became customers, became fans perhaps of the process, and then became friends. Ultimately, that's what I want. I woke up this morning to a rooster crowing. Not unusual. We kind of live in the country in a small town, really close to the lake. It's less than a quarter of a mile from our front door to the water. Not unusual to have roosters and chickens in the neighborhood, but this one wasn't in the neighborhood. This rooster was 6 feet from my window, cock-a-doodle-doo. But he had an issue. This rooster sounded like he'd been at a concert last night. Ah, cock-a-doodle-doo! I mean, he was having a rough morning. Bro needs some coffee or something, maybe a Red Bull. I don't know, do roosters drink Red Bull? He was having a rough morning though. And I posted something on Facebook and I thought, it's funny that we got a rooster 6 feet from our window because we don't own a rooster. Never bought a rooster. Now my daughters, they've got roosters. I have friends who have chickens and roosters and ducks, oh my, but I've never bought a rooster. But I got a rooster in my yard, inside the fence. Now, we've been gone for 10 days, so I haven't mowed in a minute, so my grass kind of looks like a jungle. Yeah, I'm going to have to go home this week from work and mow the yard, but it was one thing to have a rooster in the backyard. It was another thing that our morning routine includes letting the red husky and the Irish doodle out into the yard to do their little plaything before we leave for work. And out of routine, my wife opens the back door, not thinking that a rooster and a husky, which is a predator, by the way, would be an unfair game. Yeah, that little rooster got a chance to run for his life. He got his month's worth of exercise in the next 45 seconds because I was still in my boxer shorts. I wasn't going to go out in the yard and chase the dog. Eventually, I kind of had to. Anyway, but that rooster ran all over that yard trying to get away from the dog. I think the long grass gave him a little cover, gave him a little bit of chance to hide. Those bites when the dog tried to get a hold of him gave him a chance to kind of bury himself. And now we have feathers everywhere. But the rooster escaped. His first escape was across the patio and through the master bedroom door and into our bedroom. I got a live rooster in my bedroom being chased by the dog. The doodle, she got done with all of us yelling and just jumped up on the bed and watched the chaos. The husky, we had to throw into the living room and close the door so we get the rooster outside. My wife threw him over the fence and he made his escape back into the neighborhood. And he still sounds like he had a wild night last night. I wonder if it's because he keeps trespassing in other people's yards and getting chased by dogs that his voice sounds like that. I tell you this for sure, that rooster is wide awake, and the rest of the neighborhood will be for a while, I guess, until he loses his voice. Look, if you're playing in somebody else's backyard at 6 o'clock in the morning, you should expect chaos. And if you follow routine without considering all the things that are changing in your environment day by day, then perhaps you should expect chaos. And if you're not paying close attention to the collision of your routine and everybody else's chaos, then you should expect to join their chaos. I'm Loren Norris with Story Power Academy, and we help leaders tell better stories better. Now, I didn't time that, and literally, it's the first time I've ever told that story. So it needs some crafting. Can you see that? I mean, there are some places that I could have said a whole lot of words in less time. Surely you can see that. In fact, I would challenge you, anybody who's watching this right now, just jump right down there in the comments and give it a stab. Tell your kind of chickens in the yard, roosters got loose, dogs chasing the animals in the yard, they end up in your house. Any kind of story you got like that. And start a timer and see how well you can do telling that that story within 2 minutes. And if you find that's a little bit challenging, it's harder than I thought. If I've never told the story before, trying to make it fit in 2 minutes, that's not an easy thing to do. I mean, in all honesty, we heard the rooster at, 6. He got into the master bedroom at about 7:05. After we showered, he was trying to make his escape. The whole incident took about an hour. How do you compress that into 2 minutes? That's what the story power method is for. Well, what is the point that the story makes? How does that convert people to become customers? How does that convert them from customers to fans, from fans to friends? That's what the story power method is for. First, you got to select the story. Then you got to craft the story. Then you got to figure out how to connect it to the audience that's listening. Then you figure out how to lead the narrative with it, which means you got to figure out what your big narrative is. What's the big picture? We're in week 2 of our 6 weeks right now. If you're not a part of that, man, you still got time to jump in. You can catch up on 2 episodes pretty easy. We got a call tomorrow night, 2 hours, Q&A. You can jump in and be a part of that. I promise you, wherever you're at in your leadership communication, whether it's sales or it's gaining buy-in from the board or it's getting your team to do what you need them to do, if you will invest in this Story Power 6-week course, you're going to change the way you communicate. I promise you will. And if you want to come to the retreat in June, you're going to get even deeper because you're going to get a lot of hands-on, face-to-face, small, intimate group in a resort away from everybody else, just time to bask and soak and work on your stories. And if you could take a rooster story that happened over an hour's time and compress that into 2 minutes of teaching where you get a little laughter and you get a little chaos and you get a little lesson all rolled into one in 2 minutes or less, it doesn't have to sound like a sales pitch, but it'll convert like one. You got to take the time. Trust me, storytelling converts. It converts from listeners to an audience, from those strangers to the clients, from I've never heard this guy before to wow, I love what you do. If you'll take the time to select the right stories, craft those stories meticulously, consider all the ways that you could lean in, lean out, invite someone in, repel someone you don't want to work with. All those things can be done in the course of a story. And I'm going to tell you this again. It almost sounds Zeus-like. It's truer than has ever been true. A good story, a well-selected, well-crafted, well-connected story that fits your narrative is better than a slick-written, AI, alliteration-laden, emotionally driven lie. A good story beats a well-crafted lie every single time. And storytelling converts. I'm Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day. There is a retreat coming up that I want you to know about. It's called the Story Power Academy Retreat. This Story Power Retreat is about focusing on your communication skills, taking them to the next level. Discover, develop, draft, deploy, and deliver some of the best stories you've ever learned. You're going to listen, create, connect, relax, and reflect around this beautiful lake scene in Granbury, Texas. It's a chance to rejuvenate and refresh and start over with some of the best training you can possibly imagine around storytelling, leadership, and communication. Join us, get away, and relax.
Subscribe now for access to our extensive media library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom. Begin your personal growth plan at Story Power Academy.